So hello, my name is Adipat Virdi, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the future of storytelling. So just as a brief overview of the presentation, we will go through an introduction to myself and some of the work that I've been doing. I have a project that I'm currently working on as a teaser so that we can see where some of the techniques and tools in immersive and XR are going and how they're being applied. I then have just a little bit of theory. It's a bit fun, but it shows us exactly why there is a need to have a conversation about the way we tell stories. And after that, I've got some examples from people who I consider to be at the cutting edge of the future of storytelling. And we'll round up the presentation with some things to think about. So let's get going. So my name is Adipat Virdi, and I am an immersive storyteller. I started life as an architect, actually, but I've always wanted to write and make films, so I got into that. But somehow along the way, I've merged both careers, and I spend a lot of my time at the moment doing two things. I do a lot of strategic work, so this is working with production companies, with IP, to really showcase how they can further their IP and their sense of audience engagement by strategically looking at the power of narrative and what value that can add to their brand. And on the other side, I do a lot of creative work. So I work on projects with other people, and I also develop my own projects. These started as film projects, as theatre projects, but they've slowly morphed and merged into being more immersive and more experimental. I would say that one of the things at the core of who I am is using storytelling to try and make real world social change. So how do we use the power of narrative to go out in the real world and create something that people can really get behind and really change the world for good? So in terms of how I would pitch myself, I would say that I sit at that pivot between strategy and creativity. I'm a story whisperer. I get a lot of the work that I get is about sorting story out. And, you know, at the heart of all of this, I'm a writer. I love creating new worlds, new story worlds, and seeing how we can engage with those impactfully, effectively, and, you know, really get a kick out of them. You can reach me on Twitter. And I'm also on LinkedIn. So please feel free to reach out if you've got any questions, anything like that. So let's get on with the presentation. Now, I just want to start by talking about a new way of telling stories. Currently, we are in a bit of a boom in terms of how people are relating to content. So there are reasons for this, and we'll come on to that later. But one of the key things that's happening is we are going from becoming third person passive observers, i.e. reading a book or watching a film or watching a TV series, and we're moving towards being first person dynamic explorers of content and world. So whether this is via AR, VR, there is a need at the core of this for people to really engage with their content and to really immerse themselves in the experiences that they're having. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you about the project that I'm currently working on. It's called Killing Honor, and it's a transmedia immersive story world. And what we're trying to do with this project, or how it started out, is how can we eradicate forced marriages and honor crimes from the world? And is there a way that we can use story as a tool, as a platform, as software to try and get the outcome that we want? So the project, when I first conceived of it, was an immersive transmedia story world, as I said, and it was a finalist at the Sundance New Frontier Storylab. So what I'm going to do is just to briefly show you the genesis of the project and to show you how we approach this in a very new and innovative way, because what we didn't do here was just to make up a story to start with. We really wanted to understand what people were talking about and how we could provide a forum for entry into this story world. So the first thing that we did on this was to have a massive brainstorm around what the core themes were in this story world. there was a lot of content out there about the victims of forced marriages and honor crimes. A lot of stories are told in this subject area about the victims and from the victims' point of view. And we wanted to go beyond that. We really wanted to deep dive into why this culture supports these kind of crimes, why honor is used in this way, and what is it that drives people to commit these things? What drives a brother to kill his sister in the name of honor? So those kind of questions were at the core of this. And also it was, how do we introduce a world which is quite alien to people who don't know about this, but in a way that they could relate to it? So, as I say, the first entry point was looking at the core themes. What is it that people were talking about? And this was a data-driven activity. We did a lot of research, we captured a lot of data, and did analysis that showed us the core areas where people were thinking, where people were talking, and where people were interested in finding out more. So using that as a springboard, we went out and actually sort of did a massive sort of big data dump. What percentage of forced marriages are going on around the world? Where are they? Who's involved? How many of them are perpetrated by the male members of the society or the female members? So we literally caught as many data points as we could in order to inform the fictional story world that we wanted to create. Following that, it was all about the characters. So who is it that we want to tell the story about? And this was fundamentally a story about women. It was fundamentally a story about identity, equality, and things that really impacted the world today in terms of feminism, in terms of the way honor is used to subjugate women, in terms of how in societies like this, crimes are allowed to take place. So how do you turn those kind of subjective things, subjective questions, into quantitative, objective frameworks that we could use to tell this story? So the characters and who they are and how they linked into the world was very important. And the reason that's important is because of audience engagement. So like I say, we'll come back to that. But the way we conceived of this was that the primary jump-off point wasn't story. It was all about character and it was all about engagement. Where did we want the engagement? So we took the characters and we did a lot of mapping. So what you see in front of you now is a proprietary tool that we developed on how we can measure emotional response. But more than that, how can we actually create an experience, a linear experience, where we can predict and put in place ourselves as the content creators points of choice and points of possibility. And that really gave us a deep dive into exactly who these characters are, how they connected into the other characters. So in the top left of each of these images, what you have is a network map of where these characters sit in the bigger network of all the other characters as part of the whole story world. And at the bottom, we've got a map of exactly the emotional journey we want them to take so that we have something to measure the engagement against. And we took that a bit further. We used that network as a way of creating story. So each of these lines you see here were dynamic relationships between characters. So each of them was a potential for telling story. Each of them allowed us to have a way in to exploring an angle that either was being talked about or an angle that we really wanted to shine a light on. So it was very, very informative to do all of this work before we actually started telling the story. So ultimately, what we then created was a massive transmedia map of all the possibilities of what we could do, bearing in mind the themes we'd identified, the character links that we'd identified, and each of these blocks that you see are ideas at various stages of development. So we had hundreds of them, but the idea was to explore this in a macro way before we could distill it down into what the experience is today. And what the experience is today is this. We are creating a story world which has a feature film at its heart. Unfortunately, the way the industry is, we still need something that is recognized as a core story focus from which all the other transmedia elements can extend. And it's all about monetization. So how do we monetize these things, and how can we test that these things are viable in terms of creating audience engagement and some kind of, value for money. It's all about money at the end, but hopefully we'll move more towards a Star Trek economy at some point. So this world consists of the feature film, as I say. There's an immersive theatre experience, and as you see here, there's about 6 or 7 other elements that we have identified as where we would get the most traction, but also where we could really tell a powerful story. And just to highlight 2 of them, so the AR photographic exhibition, for instance, came out of lots of interviews with survivors, female survivors of honour crimes and forced marriages. And the idea here is that we're going to take iconic images of famous women, so Madonna, Princess Diana, Mother Teresa, and we're going to recreate really amazing, iconic images from their history exactly as they were, but on a massive scale. But instead of these people being in the images, we're going to transpose images of the female survivors that I talked about. And the idea is that you can go into this space and have 3 levels of immersion. Level 1, you can look at the photographs and you can marvel at how amazing they are, because they will be big and you'll be able to read about their stories. The second level of immersion is with your AR app, or if glasses are pervasive at that point, you look at these images and the women will come to life and tell you their story of survival. The third level of immersion is that we will be doing some volumetric filming, and we're going to create a space within the exhibition itself where these characters come to life and they are in the space that you are inhabiting, and they will be talking to one another. So we're going to film a conversation and recreate it in AR. So the idea is that you'll be able to walk in and around and through the space that these women are inhabiting, so you get a real sense of what they went through and what this story is about. And the VR and 360 films. So taking inspiration from Travelling While Black, this experience is based on an immersive theatre thing that I did a few years ago. And the idea is you go, you register for a theatre experience and you go for a walk, and then you'll get a call from the main character who says, look, my sister's gone missing, I'm really scared, I don't know what to do, can you help? So you, in VR, so there will be an actual space that you'll be in, you'll have a headset on, so you're totally immersed. The idea is that you then go and experience a Sikh temple, or characters from this world, or a particular part of London within which this experience is being told. And you will come back at the end of this 90-minute experience with loads of clues that you think you're delivering back to the main character. But at that point, you find out that the main character is the one who's going to kill his sister. So you become complicit. So in terms of the future of storytelling, one of the key things that we're experimenting with here is audience complicity. How do we really put someone at the heart of an issue to break that barrier between them and us and get them to empathize in a meaningful way? Now, the reason for giving you that first is I wanted to provide a framework for what I'm going to talk about next. So why is it that we need a new way to build these narratives? Why can't we stick with the existing ways of writing films, watching films, reading books, and so forth? Obviously we can, and that's going to exist, but there is an appetite for more, and there are some reasons for why this shift is happening. And at the core of this, there's a fundamental economic question about what the value is of creating and generating experiences rather than just building content. So I just want to explore that a little bit. So the first thing to bear in mind is that 2 shifts are happening. So the first thing to bear in mind is that audiences are becoming more connected. So through pervasive technology, social media, and the way that we are relating to one another in a more immediate and visceral way means that content isn't just coming to us in a linear way. When we receive content, we have the ability to talk about that content across a whole network of people and have a dialogue with the content, the characters, the world within which the IP sits. So that's the first thing to bear in mind. And the second thing to bear in mind is that content itself is becoming interactive. So it's not just a case of creating either a piece of television or writing a book or making a film. What's happening is that you have lots of other ways to explore particular content, whether it be other platforms, whether it's finding backstory, whether it's relating to the people who made the content. The world is not just about that linear content. It's within the ecology of the whole story world that's being created. The impact of this is twofold. The first is that we're no longer just dealing with plot. It's not about telling a linear story. What you need to do is to create a theme ecology, i.e. a space, a world within which all the content, all the IP, all the fragments of story that you want to tell, no matter what they are linked by common themes, common ideals. And that is key in terms of creating new forms of storytelling. And second is this notion of activated dialogue. It's no longer that you are dealing with your content in a linear way. It has to be about two-way conversation. It has to be about the dialogue that you're creating. And you have to bear that in mind. So at the core of this, what holds the story world together is that theme ecology. And what allows it to have life and to create that real-world social change, or to go beyond just experiencing it in a third-person passive way, is this activated dialogue. And that's important to bear in mind. So I just wanted to show you this slide because there's a couple of important factors that we need to bear in mind in terms of how the way we tell stories is shifting and changing as time goes on. So since stories were created, there's two key shifts. The first is the amount of control that the audience has over what they watch, how they watch it, and how they experience these different stories and story worlds. The second thing that's happening is that technology is becoming more ubiquitous. The more that technology evolves to allow us to easily access our content from wherever we want, in whatever way we want, is having a huge impact on the kind of experiences that audiences want. So the impact of this is two things. The first is that barriers to creativity are disappearing. We now have the tools and the technology to tell stories in whatever way we want, across as many platforms as we want, and engage audiences in whatever way that we choose. And the second thing that's happening is that because of those barriers to creativity reducing, the possibilities of engagement are increasing hugely. So stories now are all about bearing in mind what audience engagement strategy you have. So you almost have to design the audience, as it were. And that's a key shift in terms of where stories are moving. So just to summarize this part, we are moving from a content focus to an engagement focus. So we are designing connected experiences. So instead of linear narratives, we are looking at multi-platform transmedia narratives. Instead of content consumers, we're looking at content creators. And the key thing here, as we've discussed, is that instead of third-person observation being the main mode of engaging with story, we are moving towards a world where it's all about first-person immersion. And how do we make that possible? And how do we create stories that cater for that? So I just wanted to highlight the work of two key people. The first person that I'd like to highlight is BrightBlack. They are a UK-based organization. There's two people who are amazing at telling the kind of stories that they do. And the second is Lance Weiler at the Columbia Storytelling Lab. And the work that he's doing in the US with Columbia is having huge global impact, and I wanted to showcase some of their work. Obviously, there are hundreds of other practitioners in this world doing this kind of work. But the reason for showcasing these guys is that there is some particular innovation and some particular thinking that they are doing, which really echo the points that I'm trying to make in the presentation today. So, BrightBlack. As we've said, they consist of two people. So we've got Simon Wilkinson and Myra Apenar, and they've been collaborating for quite a few years now on sort of VR, AR, XR experiences. The first project of theirs is Whilst the Rest Were Sleeping. So This, as it says, 17 VR installations, they had live performance across 30 websites, there was a massive transmedia universe. But at the core of the experience, it's about the question they were asking the audience. What they were trying to do here, and what all of these projects have in common, is that they have a key question that they are asking the audience in order to create dialogue. Now, here, whilst the rest were sleeping, explores how we can know what's real in a world dominated by paid-for persuasive messages. So they're very interested in things like fake news, about telling the truth. And what they're doing is using XR technology to explore the different facets of that question, to give us as the audience different ways into this world that relate to us and can echo the core message. The second experience of theirs, which is very resonant, is Somnai. So this is a multisensory experience, and it was set in a 20,000 square foot warehouse, and it's all about VR, spatial sound, live performance, with one key question at its core. And that question was, are we so unmoored that we would bow to any god? So what they're really interested in is exploring a world of lucid dreaming. So their work very much consists of mastering the subconscious mind to really understand who we are as people. What this experience does is leads you down quite a few rabbit holes and is actually about the things we're scared of. It allows you to face yourself in terms of the things that you fear, the things that you worry about, the things you're anxious about, and create a world where you totally immerse yourself in something which is unlike anything I've seen done yet. The reason for highlighting this project is that we are dealing with some real questions around the human condition and using storytelling to find a way for all of us as society to come together and really explore these in a meaningful way. And the last of their projects that I'd like to showcase is Third Culture Kids. So this is very meaningful to me because as I consider myself a third culture kid, in the sense that, you know, I was brought up in the UK, but I have Indian parents. I was born in Africa, and currently I have mixed race children. And it's very much about what my place, what my identity is. How can I really define where I belong? Because I don't feel like I belong here, but I don't feel like I belong in India or in Africa. So how do I define my identity? And is the fact that I'm a third culture kid something that I can use as the main place where my identity comes from? And this experience talks to that. So using VR installation, a downloadable video game, and using Twitch in quite a meaningful and pervasive way, Third Culture Kids ask the question of whether third culture can be an identity too. And this was very meaningful, or is very meaningful, in terms of how it's brought together disparate people who feel disenfranchised. So as I say, I relate to that quite a lot. But again, the point to bear in mind here is that technology takes a back seat. This isn't about showcasing fancy VR tools or the fact that you are in a space and you get to do cool things. It's all about you and how you can relate to other people in a very, very visceral and immersed way. And that's what I think is very powerful about this work. And I also think it's very powerful in terms of where storytelling is moving. So just briefly to talk about Lance Weiler and the Columbia Storytelling Lab. So Lance is somebody who has created some amazing experience and is always at the cutting edge of where technology and storytelling meet. So his work is very exciting. So as well as running the Columbia University Digital Storytelling Lab, Lance is also involved with a lot of different projects and lots of different initiatives to connect people from around the world around core ideas, core subjects, and use storytelling as a framework to allow that connection. So a lot of his projects are in the vein of experimentation. So the first one, an earlier project of his, was Collapsus, which he wrote and was one of the technical directors on. So Collapsus is an immersive web experience set in the near future, but it's all about the global energy crisis. So here is a website, essentially, that is split into three sections. One is a play space where you can go in and take control of different metrics, different levers that allow you to see what the future would look like if you were to play around with the way the world is going in terms of energy use and so forth. But also, there is a whole fictional story world that is based on the decisions that you make within this experience. And then you have lots of footage, real footage of news, fabricated footage, but all of this creating an immersive interactive website that gives you a powerful way to connect to a real world issue in a really nice gamified way. And that's very exciting in terms of what this led to. So when you look at this in terms of who experienced it, the numbers, in terms of longevity of experience, if you compare it to some of the documentaries and some of the traditional storytelling methods that are out there, what this experience did was to prolong the interest curve. So rather than there being a spike when, say, a film comes out or a documentary comes out, and then that spike falling away and the level of conversation falling away, what this experience does is gives you something that elongates that experience, elongates that immersion, and gives you a way into something that has long-term potential for you understanding the issue and actually knowing what you can do about it if you so choose. So that was quite important. The next experience is Sherlock Holmes and the Internet of Things. So Lance at the Columbia University Digital Storytelling Lab developed this as an open R&D space. So the difference here is that you've got the work of Sherlock Holmes, you've got this, the detective novels and so forth, but it's using that as a way to examine other issues around emergence of technology, the Internet of Things, and how people engage with those things and the impact that that has on us. So it's a very innovative way of basically hacking Sherlock Holmes and the work that he did. So just a quick thing on the Internet of Things. As a definition, right, it describes the network of physical objects embedded with sensors and other technologies for the purpose of connecting and exchanging data over the internet. One of the key movements in terms of the way we tell stories is to be able to have the power of this kind of technology and this kind of pervasive interfacing at our fingertips. The Internet of Things is a powerful way for us to tell stories in our own unique way and really give it purpose. So it's worth looking into because it's something that is becoming more and more pervasive, more and more ubiquitous in terms of the way people are telling stories. So as I said, Sherlock Holmes is being hacked, and the way that Lance has done this is to really create a space where rather than telling you a story, you come together around a core mission, a core question, and you deliver the stories. You actually execute the telling of those stories. So whether it's through a hackathon, whether it's through gameplay, whether it's through doing mock plays, as you can see here with all of these images, you're using technology, you're using storytelling, you're using brainstorming, there's agile workshopping, rapid prototyping, all coming together to create a melting pot of story and a place where ideas can come to fruition and really challenge the audience in terms of what they get out of this experience. Now, the final project that I'd like to showcase is, in my mind, one of the most amazing immersive theatre pieces that I've seen in a very long time, and it's called Where There's Smoke. This is a very personal experience that Lance not only created and had multiple awards for, but he's literally put the whole process of how he made it, why he made it, on the internet under a Creative Commons license, which is absolutely mind-blowing. So it's worth having a look if you get a chance. Where There's Smoke is about memory and loss, as it says, but it's also a way for participants to really use a simple storytelling device, i.e. trying to figure out the cause of a tragic fire, but it's the way in which you engage with other audience members, and it's the way in which you engage with the core questions around the human condition that really lift this out from other experiences. So this experience is quite hard to classify. So Lance's father was very ill, and that had a big impact on Lance. So it's all about exploring that relationship between him and his father. But at the core, in terms of that core thematic drive, it's about grief, memory, and loss. And it's an experience that explores that in quite an exciting way. It premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival, and if you get a chance to see it, a lot of the material is still online, as I say. So you start the experience where you are actually paired with another member of the audience, and you sit around a table and you talk about questions around grief, memory, and loss. And then you try and discuss things such as what's meaningful. And one of the core things that you're asked to do is to look at objects that are meaningful to you. So why are you emotionally connected to an object? What memories does that bring up? And why is it something that's effective and significant? When I was, just as an aside on this, this is a really powerful tool in terms of breaking that barrier between your audience and the issue that you're trying to raise. When I worked at the BBC, we did an experience for BBC Arabic where we did something similar in that we took objects that people had with them when they fled their countries and tried to get to freedom. And in defining those objects, by putting it out to the people who were engaging with the website and the story, that created an emotional connection which then led to that experience being seen again and again. So the point here is that no matter what you're dealing with, whether it's something completely alien to your audience, you can get around that and find a way through it by really looking at what resonates emotionally between you and your audience. And this is a great example of that in the way that Lance has used this question of emotional connection to objects as a way of describing things around memory, loss, and grief. I wanted to show you this slide in that there are different things at different parts of the experience where all you are doing is creating catalysts for thinking and emotionally engaging. So the story almost takes a back seat to emotional engagement, which is what we were talking about before, this ecology that you need to create within which fragments of story exist. But your job as a storyteller is to make sure that the engagement, the root of engagement, the story you're telling around and with the audience is what takes priority. One of the other things that you do in this experience is you walk through almost a maze of different spaces and different rooms. And one of them is an actual fire damaged room where you sit and explore another part of the experience. So this kind of visceral embodiment of the story world is really effective in terms of creating that first person immersion that we were talking about. We talked about the Internet of Things. One of the things that Where There's Smoke does is uses the Internet of Things to really create a connection between objects, physical spaces, audiences, and the sort of more subjective notions of memory, loss, and grief, which is very clever in terms of how people then come out and are changed by the experience that they've just been through. And when you come out of the experience, you're asked to sit and think about what you've been through and record it in some way, whether that's a drawing, whether that's some notes, whether that's any kind of expression that allows you to say what was meaningful. All of these images, or whatever form you choose, are then collated and put up on the wall in this room, and it's an amazing look back at what other people found meaningful, and it gives you that sense of community, gives you that sense of belonging, and is one fundamental way that storytelling is changing, this idea that what you are doing is building a sense of community, building a sense of collective identity around the core themes of a story. So having talked about all of those things, I'd like to conclude by just giving you a framework for where I think the future of storytelling is going. The first thing is, as we've talked about, is this shift from third person to first person. And it's important to bear in mind because the way that people are now engaging is very much more dynamic than it is passive. So the way we tell stories needs to have that at its core. The second is that storytelling is an industrial application. If you look at the medical industry, you look at any other retail sector, automotive industry, the power of narrative, the power of storytelling is being used as a way to connect your audience to your content. So the more you understand about audience engagement, the more effective the story is that you'll tell. The key to where we're going in terms of storytelling is very much about breaking the barrier between them and us. You could argue that that was always the case, but more so today, we have the tools to really be able to create empathy and understanding and a more homogenous society than we ever did. So the onus is on us being able to use story to do that. We are in the business of gamifying advocacy. At the moment, whether that advocacy is political, whether it's just you trying to tell a story about yourself, what you are doing is gamifying that advocacy, that message that you're trying to give. And if you bear that in mind at the core of the storytelling that you are doing, it's an important way to really start to break down how you tell that story or how you create the framework for that story in the first place. In all the work that I've done so far, I really believe that what I do, at the core of what I do, is that I build empathy engines. I'm building a framework, a machine that allows me to create empathy, and that is what drives the kind of storytelling that I do. And the next point is very important. When you're building an empathy engine, you have to understand the core emotive question, the core question that you're asking your audience. Because at the moment, in terms of where we're going, and with all the things that I've explained about how communication and storytelling is changing, if you don't start with something that has the potential to create dialogue, then that doesn't work in the way that we are telling stories. The one thing that I would say that is key to the future of storytelling and the way we're moving in terms of engagement is not only the core emotive question, but how big a question you can ask of your audience. It really is about real world social change. More than ever, we have an opportunity to tell stories and engage an audience around an issue, around a topic that would allow us to be a better society and a better world. So storytelling is becoming very, very powerful as a way to make change. And that's where I'd like to end this presentation. Because for me, after everything that I've said, the future of storytelling is about how we can use narrative to create engagement and provide a framework for real world social change.